Today we'll be hosting Sam Daley-Harris of quite a few different, fame, but I won't let him introduce himself in a moment. Sam, I was wondering, maybe do you want to introduce yourself and let us know who the speaker is today?
One of the ideas in the book, Reclaiming Our Democracy, Every Citizen's Guide to Transformational Advocacy, is the idea of knowing your why and sharing it. Whether you're an NGO staff or NGO nonprofit volunteers or whatever, know your why and share it. And there's a Harvard professor, Marshall Gans, who wrote the story or developed the story of self, which is basically what happened in your life and what decisions did you make that got you to this commitment. And so I'm going to introduce myself by telling my story of self. I love to tell it, actually. And it goes like this. I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in music, and I played percussion instruments in the Miami Philharmonic Orchestra for 12 years and taught high school music. And 44 years ago, I founded the anti-poverty lobby Results. And a lot of times I'm asked, music, poverty lobby, what's the connection? And when I look back in my life, there's certain experiences that start pointing me in a different direction. The death of a friend around high school graduation in 1964 and the assassination of US Senator Robert Kennedy around college graduation in 1968 got me to asking the questions of purpose. Why am I here? What am I here to do? What's my purpose? 9 years later, I'm invited to a presentation on ending world hunger put on by the Hunger Project. And I go to this event thinking, well, hunger's inevitable. What do I know? I'm a musician. Well, I'm thinking it's inevitable because, in my mind, there are no solutions. Because if there were solutions, somebody would have done something by now. But I go to this event and it's obvious right away there's no mystery to growing food or clean water or basic health or literacy. I'm not hopeless about the perceived lack of solutions. I'm hopeless about human nature. People will just never get around to doing the things that can be done. But there's one human nature I have some control over, my own, and my questions: why am I here? What am I here to do? So I get involved in a big way. This is the end of the story. In 1978 and 79, I spoke to 7,000 high school students, classroom by classroom, on ending world hunger. And before I went into the first classroom, I read some statements from Jimmy Carter's Commission on World Hunger and others calling for the political will to end hunger. That'd be like, we need the political will for dark skies, calling for the political will to end hunger. So I asked 7,000 high school students, what's the name of your member of Congress? I don't want to know if you wrote him. I don't want to know if you met him, just the name. I'm not going to ask any guesses. Out of 7,200, fewer than 3% could answer correctly. 6,800, over 97%, could not tell me the name of their member of Congress. And this anti-poverty lobby Results grew out of this gap between the calls for the political will to end hunger on the one hand and the lack of basic information on who represented us in Washington. So that's a different kind of introduction of myself. But think about your story of self. Do you know it? Do you share it a lot? Have you really not written it down or thought about it yet? I urge you to do that, to think about, why are you here in this organization? Why do you do this work? What happened in your life? And what decisions did you make that got you to this commitment? It's very powerful in engaging people and helping them stay engaged. Now, I'm going to do this presentation, and you might say, wow, we already do that. Great. And congratulate yourself. Or you might think, that'd be a stretch, but I could try that. Or great. See what you can get out of this in terms of maybe a stretch. I've done a number of national US national public radio interviews, and I've been quite moved by the vulnerability of the hosts. I'm going to read two questions that I've been asked this year. And this first question, it's kind of like an answer to why did you reissue Reclaiming Our Democracy, this 2024 edition? And it's the vulnerability and pain, really, in this question. It was question number 2 on 1A on NPR in the US. This is its question. The passive nature to our politics now, you can feel beat down by it. I mean, this is my career and I feel beat down by it. It's much more of an effort for me. I don't participate in the same way others do because I'm a political journalist, but I do have to pay attention. It's a grind. It's a grind, Sam. I mean, I know you know that. What am I feeling? What's the way out of that? I'm not an activist, but you know what I'm saying. I was kind of blown away by that question, and that honestly, I can only imagine there were many tens of thousands listening to that question. The first thing I said to him was, Apollo astronaut Rusty Schweikert said, "We aren't passengers on spaceship Earth, we're the crew." Well, are we? Are we crew? And if we're crew, how does crew operate? What do we do? The second thing I said was, futurist and climate activist Alex Steffens said, in fact, these days, cynicism is obedience. Well, yeah, if I'm cynical, I'm obedient to the way things are. I'm not going to do anything. Why would I if nothing I do makes a difference? The other question was from it's Here and Now, and it's Deepa Fernandez. And this was her question. I may have to move something out of the way. One of the things I found really insightful from your book, you say, to move from passively caring about something, say the environment, climate change, these big things that are actually happening in our lives, to actually taking action, we have to, and I'm quoting from you here in your book, be honest about the hopelessness that's in all of us. I found that really struck a chord with me, Sam, because the issues we do care about sometimes seem massive and immutable. How do you move past that sense of hopelessness? So I was just really moved by the vulnerability that that they were expressing, and we're going to answer questions like these and others during this presentation. Here, I would have told my story of self, which I already have, and I'm going to come off screen once more, so it's not all hiding behind the slides. And so I want to just describe briefly the main idea in the book. Reclaiming Our Democracy's main theme is transformational advocacy. Now, we all know transactional advocacy, sign the petition, transaction complete. But with transformational advocacy, volunteers are trained, encouraged, and then succeed at doing things as advocates they never thought they could do, like meeting with an elected official and bringing them on board to your issue. And as a result, you see yourself in a new light. A transformation takes place in how you see yourself to be. And so that's the basic idea of transformational advocacy. I think I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna skip a couple of these slides. They're actually good. You can beg me to go back to them later, but I'm gonna move on to a few stories. Maxine Thomas. This is Maxine Thomas with her US Senator Todd Young, Republican of Indiana in the United States. This is not a selfie. Maxine and Todd Young are buddies and they work together on poverty issues. And Maxine said, I had a heart for service, but I was clueless about advocacy, especially political advocacy. Maxine has a lived experience of poverty, and she joined a group called Circles, where people work together to move out of poverty. And her group discovered that they had a story to tell, and they Googled around, what's the name of a group that could help us tell our story? And they found Results, and they joined Results, and Maxine gets a scholarship to the results conference in Washington, D.C. She borrows luggage and goes to the conference. And the night before her first ever meetings with elected officials, senators, and representatives, she learns that the earned income tax credit is about to expire. In 2020, the earned income tax credit provided $3,100 to a low income working family like Maxine's. I'm going to read, it's on the slides, but this is an excerpt from Reclaiming Our Democracy. This is Maxine. The first congressional meeting on Lobby Day was Senator Dan Coates, Republican of Indiana, and brought new ahas. He was there for the entire meeting. I can still feel it. I was a ball of emotions. It felt like an out of body experience. I was processing being in DC, and now I'm in an exclusive meeting. We're all dressed up. It was high level. The volunteers were polished and sharp, but I was scared. Now, that's pretty much everyone on their first ever meeting. But I was scared, worried whether I would say the right thing. I think it was Lisa who asked, "Would you like to say anything?" I thanked the senator and said, "I learned last night why I'm here. I didn't know I could come here from Indianapolis to talk to you, someone who represents us and can help us. I can't imagine what will happen if the earned income tax credit is taken away from families like mine. I'm able to take a deep breath and catch up on my bills because of the EITC. I look forward to tax time because that's the only time I can handle my financial burden. I'd like to take my kids to the mall to buy shoes without worrying if it'll take away from other bills." Senator Coates straightened himself up and said, "Wow, this has been emotional. Results, you do a good job of training people. Where did you find her?" And then he thanked me. That was the year he retired. He was very connected, even though it wasn't on his radar. He acknowledged my voice and thanked me for being there. Now, after a full day of first ever meetings with elected officials, Maxine said, "I was euphoric. I was on this high and felt I was part of something revolutionary. I was euphoric is a far cry from feeling hopeless and cynical." So that is transformational advocacy. From I was clueless about advocacy, especially political advocacy. From there to I was euphoric, I was on this high. How do you find an organization that's committed to delivering transformational advocacy? What do you look for? And I'm going to go over three things. One, recruitment and building community, not bringing in new people to just build an e-blast list, but real people talking to real people, informing them into chapters, and offering an inspiring monthly whole of organization webinar, guest speakers, Q&A, inspiration. One, recruitment and building community. Two, training. How do you get the meeting with an elected official? How do you plan for it? What do you ask for? How do you get a letter to the editor to publish? How do you write it, etc.? Two, training. Three, the organization encourages breakthroughs. They encourage their members to move out of their comfort zone because confidence grows and transformation happens when you're encouraged and supported in doing things you thought you couldn't do. And in the book, there's this drawing of small circle labeled your comfort zone. And to the right is a much larger circle labeled where the magic happens. Next story, number two. In 2019, US President Donald Trump called for a 29% cut to the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria after the Global Fund had saved 38 million lives since its inception in 2002. It was time for a Global Fund 3-year replenishment, and other countries would likely follow the US lead. Now, most people never heard that President Trump called for a 29% cut. And if they did, they'd probably throw up their hands. What can you do? You can't fight City Hall. The people I know roll up their sleeves and get to work. And they got hundreds of members of Congress, Republicans and Democrats, to co sponsor resolutions on creating in support of the Global Fund and in signing letters to the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, and to the lead appropriators in Congress. So, what do these revolutionary advocates look like? Well, you could go to a gallery view on this screen right now if you wanted to know what they look like. They look like you, and they also look like Margaret Smith. This is Margaret Smith of Dallas, Texas, seen with her Senator Ted Cruz holding his hand with two hands. She said, I learned in results that I hold Senator Cruz's hands with two hands and I don't let go until I've finished my laser talk on the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. That year, 2019, was the first year Senator Cruz ever said yes to a request from Results in Texas. And that was he co sponsored the resolution in the Senate in support of the Global Fund. Instead of President Trump's proposed 29% cut, two House Republicans and two House Democrats stood on a stage in Lyon, France, at the Global Fund replenishment and announced that the Congress would provide a 16% increase to the Global Fund instead of a 29% cut. By 2022, the end of that 3-year replenishment, the Global Fund partnership had saved 59 million lives since its inception in 2002. So, why does this matter? And how does action like this affect people's lives? I would normally do a reading here. I'm not going to do it, but I'm going to tell you what it would have been. I would typically read from a book, Race Against Time, Searching for Hope in AIDS-Ravaged Africa. It was a compilation of lectures by Stephen Lewis, a Canadian who was Secretary General's special envoy for AIDS in Africa. The book was in 2005. Don't forget the Global Fund was launched in 2002, and AIDS was raging through Africa in particular. The thing I would have raised was when Stephen Lewis goes with Gracia Michelle, the wife of the late Nelson Mandela, to visit a sibling-headed household in Uganda that both parents had died of AIDS. There were no other relatives to care for them. So the household was headed by the oldest child. The 14-year-old child was the head of this sibling headed household. And it's very moving. And that's why people like Margaret Smith work on this. I mean, yes, you could say 59 million lives saved, but because of the individual lives that a number like that represents. This is my last story. And this is Ellie Sparks. Let's show you. That's Ellie Sparks. When Ellie Sparks was, before she joined, actually, this story is when she was a volunteer. She's now on staff of Citizens Climate Lobby. She said, when I joined CCL, I was suffering from climate trauma. I would read Bill McKibben's book, Earth, and I would weep at home and I would weep at work. And then I joined CCL, and 18 months later, I was co leading a workshop on creating relationships with members of Congress and editorial writers. She said, our executive director, Mark Reynolds, said, we're betting the farm on relationships. So go get a relationship with your member of Congress and your editorial writer. She said, what in the world does a relationship with a member of Congress look like? And how do you get a relationship with an editorial writer? Some in CCL use the model of a work relationship. And this is Ellie from the book. I'm reading from Reclaiming Our Democracy. She said, my relationship model is different. I adore romantic relationships, so I use romance as my model. That first meeting with the editorial writer, it's like a blind date, only you've decided beforehand you're going to marry this fellow. You're going to be sweet and interesting, not too intense. If it doesn't work with the editorial writer, you're going to marry one of his friends at the newspaper, the business editor, environment writer, city editor, someone at this paper will find you interesting and compelling. It's just a matter of being persistent until you find the right connection. I see the relationship with a member of Congress as an arranged marriage. If you live in her district, the member's aide has to meet with you. That's what our congressperson's ledge director told us in January. We schedule 45-minute meetings. He keeps us well over an hour. He doesn't want us to leave. Why? Because a good arranged marriage starts out cold and slowly heats up. That's different from a love match, which starts out hot and slowly cools down. Don't you love Ellie Sparks? Then Ellie shared the essence of transformational advocacy. She said, during our conference, I met with 20 congressional offices over 4 days. I met with many folks whose view of the world was very different than mine. Going into their offices was hard. I had to let go of a lot of emotional baggage. I no longer could judge them or hold hostility in my heart toward them. I had to let go of my fear of climate change and my fear that they wouldn't listen to me. I had to center myself in love, releasing fear and centering in love. This is sacred and profound work. End of quote. Who thinks about advocacy as being sacred and profound? Obviously, it can become that if you find the right organization and open yourself up to it. So I'm going to close with a quote. I'm going to read it twice, but before that, if you want to, well, I'll put a link in the chat about ordering the book if you'd like, Reclaiming Our Democracy. If you'd like to join the Civic Courage mailing list, you can use the QR code that I'll put up in a moment. And the only other thing is, if you or a group that you work with would like to host an author talk, a book talk, you can email me and I'll give you the email address in a moment. I'm going to close with this. This is the true joy in life. This is from George Bernard Shaw's Man and Superman. I'm going to read it twice. This is the true joy in life, the being used for a purpose recognized by yourself as a mighty one, the being a force of nature instead of a selfish, feverish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. I am of the opinion that my life belongs to the whole community, and it is my privilege to do for it whatever I can. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die, for the harder I work, the more I live. I rejoice in life for its own sake. Life is no brief candle to me. It is a sort of splendid torch which I've got hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations. And I'm going to read it once more. This is the true joy in life, the being used for a purpose, recognized by yourself as a mighty one, the being a force of nature instead of a selfish, feverish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. I am of the opinion that my life belongs to the whole community, and it is my privilege to do for it whatever I can. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die, for the harder I work, the more I live. I rejoice in life for its own sake. Life is no brief candle to me. It is a sort of splendid torch which I've got hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations. End of quote. So just thank you for your commitment to this work with DarkSky and making a difference with your advocacy. Thanks so much.
That's great. Thanks, Sam. And yes, we do thank our wonderful advocates and supporters that have joined today, and everyone else maybe listening out in the ether. That was great. Really inspirational. Thanks, Sam.
So I'm going to put in chat just the link to the book website in case you want to. I think I'll also add my email, which is sam@civiccourage.org. And that would be Sam. I'm going to just put it at, and you can connect with me if you're interested in the possibility of a book talk or whatever. Thanks.
Yeah.
Anyone want to ask a question
Yeah,
or?
There were a few popped up. Otherwise, folks, please feel free to use the raise hand feature or throw it into the Q&A or chat so we can get through them all. But yeah, thanks, Jeff. I'll start with this one, then we'll go to you. Trung posted in the chat, is meeting such politicians like a certain someone more positive experience than getting your ears slapped with their performative rhetorics? How
Well,
would you
again,
respond to that?
yeah, let me see. One of the slides I skipped, and I'm going to go back to it for a moment. There was a study by the independent sector, which found that 31% of nonprofits were doing advocacy or lobbying in the last 5 years. That was less than half of what was doing it 20 years ago. So fewer nonprofits are doing advocacy. And then there was a study by the Congressional Management Foundation, and they surveyed advocacy professionals. And they asked them, what is your main tactic as an advocacy professional? And 79% said an email form letter. You know, in the US, it's give me your zip code and your name, and I'll send the letter for you. Yeah, 79% said an email form letter was their primary advocacy tactic, but only 3% of congressional staff said an email form letter made a big difference. So we're being fed a lot of this stuff that doesn't make much of a difference. So now back to the question. Yeah, absolutely. When I'm coaching a group on meeting with a member of Congress who opposes their initiative, anyone on this call have brought a DarkSky initiative to a city council or a county council and been met with opposition? Okay, great. Well, these are the three questions I have groups ask. Let's say I'm meeting with a city council chair, or I'm meeting with a member or the mayor or something. Question one, we know you don't support this initiative. What would it take to change your mind? Now you're listening for assignments, and I'm going to give you an example in a moment. Question number two. Well, number one, again, we know you don't support this initiative. What would it take to change your mind? Question number two, could you say more about that? Question number three, why do you think that is? So I know this guy, it's a long story, but I'll show the short one. He's a Pennsylvania who wanted to start a climate solutions caucus, finding leaders in South Florida. He met with a Republican member of Congress and he said, what would it take to change your mind? And the member of Congress said, well, if you could get the chambers of commerce on board. And he did. Letters from signed by Miami, Miami Beach, Coral Gables, North Miami, chambers of Congress. And he came back to the member of Congress with the letter. And the member of Congress said, well, if you could get the mayors on board. And he did. He came back with letters from the mayor of Miami, Miami Beach, Coral Gables. And, you know, the member of Congress eventually became the lead Republican on a House Climate Solutions Caucus because he asked what it would take to change your mind. He took assignments and he fulfilled the assignments. So, you know, what would it take from this city council chair or mayor or city council member to change their mind?
Hmm,
Could you say more about that?
that's great. Could you real quick before we get to you, Jeff, could you restate those three questions for folks taking notes at home?
We know you don't support this initiative or bill. What would it take to change your mind? Two, could you say more about that? You're really listening. Two, could you say more about that? Three, why do you think that is? You're asking them to go deeper and deeper and deeper on this opposition. And the opposition is here, but deeper down, I don't know, there's a way out probably.
Hmm, great. Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
And Jeff,
Well,
where are
thank
you
you.
again?
I'm up
Where,
in Bayfield, Wisconsin, up in the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore, one of the most beautiful places on the planet. Thank you, Sam. I really appreciated that for many years, I taught a class for high school students about writing letters to the editor, how to write a member of Congress, and all that sort of thing. But that was really right on the cusp of the growth of the internet and the change in our culture, when people don't write hard letters anymore and people don't read newspapers as much anymore, at least the hard copies. I'm wondering if you can speak to two things. For a young person who wants to be involved, what has changed in advocacy and what has remained the same?
Well, that's a very big question, as in lots of possible answers. And let me go on it. What's really changed, as far as I'm concerned, the most is this. And when you talk about young people, it's kind of like, I don't talk on the phone. I text. I don't. So what's really changed in a way for all of us, I mean, don't forget, the primary text is a email form letter, which is not from me, really. It's from the organization with my permission for them to send it with my name on it, kind of thing. So let me take another route to it. And we did a letters to the editor training at Betty Maya. I don't remember, was it before COVID or in the middle of it? Anyway.
I think it was during COVID.
Okay, yeah. So
Yeah.
one of the points of the letters to the editor training was, if your letter is published, don't do a dance and take a nap. Do a dance and then post it on social media. Send it to the elected officials you're working on. Call the key aide to make sure they saw it. And so, as you said, people aren't reading the hard copy of the newspaper. I don't know, actually, if lots of people are reading a newspaper online, kind of on their phone or whatever. I mean, part of the problem is editorial boards, unless it's the New York Times and Washington Post, have shrunk. If you were with the newspaper that had 3 editorial writers, they might have 1 now. And if they had 8, they might have 3 or 2 now. So they're shrinking and disappearing in some cases, but they're not gone. And my question is, you're in the Canadian portion of Wisconsin up there, and anyway, if I'm a member of Congress from your district serving in Washington, where do I look to find out what's going on back in the district when I'm in DC? Of course, I get some report on the letters I get and the meetings I have, but do I check with a top blogger? Or do I read some of the key newspapers? And of course, do I read newspapers that mention me by name, kind of thing? And so, yeah, I don't know if there's any kind of thing you'd want to say in response. So I'm saying, don't give up on letters to the editor, but don't go to bed after you get one. Send it around on social media and to the elected officials you're trying to enroll, kind of thing.
Great advice. Thanks, Sam.
Okay.
Wayne, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, Sam, that was great.
Where are you, Wayne?
I'm in Texas, Blancover, a little county, rural county out just west of Austin.
Okay, great.
And just you asked, had any of us ever run into opposition when we bring night sky issues up to local government? And I'm sure most of the people on this call have. Several years ago, I received a letter that our little mayor had the city attorney write to me, giving me a cease and desist order to stop bugging the city about night sky stuff. And over the course of several years, we went from that to most of the city council and the new mayor becoming members of our little organization and working with us for us to become an international dark sky community.
Yay!
Opposite persistence against opposition will pay off.
Yeah.
But let me share you just one really a quick thing in a preemptive action. Politicians are most attentive to you when votes count or when they're running for election, re-election, etc. Well, this last voting cycle, for the in the primaries, we had 5 people running to be state representatives in our district. We posed a question to them. We said, if elected or reelected, would you support statewide legislation to give our counties the ability to regulate outdoor lighting? It's an issue. And to pay for it and pay for the enforcement using hotel occupancy tax money. This is money that visitors come in and pay to stay there. And we did that while the primary was going on, while votes were on the table. And oh yeah, we told them how many people we have in our organization and the other 15 similar organizations we have here in the Hill Country. We had, of the 5, we had 3 that said, yep, I would support that if elected. We had one that just blew us off, and we had one that said, no, that's a crazy idea. Well, one of the ones that said, yeah, we'll support you, won, and has now told us that she'll have her legislative assistant get in touch with us in the fall. Just we'll see where this goes.
Yes. So when's Wayne going to lead one of these sessions? Yeah, great. Yeah, yeah. Now, did you meet with any of those 5, or was it a letter and they wrote back? And
I did it all on with email. I did meet with one of the with a legislative assistant who came to our little town on another mission, and I collared him when he came into town. Yeah. And so yeah, and then that's
was it the incumbent that won the primary?
I'm sorry, again?
Was it the incumbent who won the sitting state rep who won the primary?
Well, yes and no. They redistricted
okay.
us. Yeah.
So it's a mix. Okay.
Yeah, it's a mix.
Yeah. Who else?
There's a question from the chat that I'll read off. What do you recommend really as a good first step towards building a relationship with your elected official, whether it be local or regional? Is it best to meet with them, tell them a dark skies before making an ask?
Well, okay, so that's a great question. Let me just think through this a little bit. So, I mean, we should do all the things. I mean, we should write them first. And if we don't hear back, we should call them, make sure they got the email or letter, make sure that's working. We should connect with and I don't know if we're talking city council or US Senate. I mean, that's a very big difference in terms of the number of constituents. You should talk to their aide. It might be in a small town. The city council member, maybe they have one aide that's for all the count. I don't know what, in the smallest cities kind of thing. But you should start a kind of a phone conversation thing. And then, yes, you really want to work up to having a meeting, not to have a meeting, but to build a relationship, to build a partnership. And in that first meeting where you share why you care about this initiative, Dark Skies work, etc., and you give them an initiative specific, yeah, you should make an ask, to which they might say no or yes, or I'll get back to you, or whatever it is. So that's basic overarching answer. I want to talk about something else that's in the book, the champion scale, that your elected official, whatever level they are, they might be opposed. A lot of people say, well, mine's a Neanderthal. There's no way I'm going to. No, opposed. You want to move opposed to neutral. And if they might be neutral on your issue, you want to move neutral to supporter. And a lot of times people go, wow, they're already a supporter. We don't have to do anything. No, you want to move a supporter up to being an advocate. Like, well, I'll give you an example in a moment. And you're not done yet. You want to move an advocate up to being a leader on this issue and someday a champion. So opposed, neutral, supporter, not done yet, advocate, leader, champion. And so if I'm working with, well, like it could have been Wayne who said, I got a cease and desist letter. I would call that opposed. But the question is, what do you do? Now, actually, he got a new mayor or whatever it was, and then that happens too. But I'm going to go back to Congress for a moment, just to give you a flavor. If I'm working with a group who has a member of Congress who opposes their initiative, I have them go to their website. Now, in the city council won't be quite the same. and go to their news releases and look at their list of news releases, which is what they're proud of, and find something they're proud of that you actually like. They may be proud of 20 things and you only like one of them. Whatever that one is, write a letter to the editor thanking them for their leadership on X, whatever that is that you're proud of, and hoping they can bring the same leadership to our initiative, Dark Sky initiatives kind of thing. And in other words, what you're doing is you're speaking, you're letting them see that it's not just one or four of you locally badgering them, that you're actually talking to the whole community, in this case, in a letter to the editor, but you're not bashing them. You're thanking them for their leadership on something or other and hoping they bring that same kind of leadership to your issue, which you described briefly in your letter to the editor. That's one example of what one might do. Who's their religious leader? What church do they go to? Who's the largest employer in your city, if it's a city council, or in the congressional district? Who are influencers in the district that you would want to bring on board to get their help in bringing them on board? So those are some ideas as it relates to, I think, the question that was in the chat. I'm going to actually put the book's website in the chat once more. Oh, there it is. And I think if you're getting a good hit from these stories, that's really the book, basically, Reclaiming Our Democracy. But it's the 2024 edition. There were earlier editions. Actually, the first edition was published 30 years ago. And I'm going to show you a picture. I hope the lighting's not too weird. Gosh, can you see that picture? On one side is, oh, there it is. One side is me on the, well, I don't know if it's your right. And on the left is Muhammad Yunus of the Grameen Bank in Bangladesh. And in the middle is Bill Clinton in the Oval Office. And he's actually holding the edition from 1993, I think it was, 30 years ago. And I got into the Oval Office because of Muhammad Yunus, not because of me. I was like his luggage carrier, because Bill Clinton, when he was running for Congress, for president, said Muhammad Yunus ought to get the Nobel Prize, which he then did. About 13 years after that photo, kind of thing. But yeah, so the latest edition is the 2024 edition. And if anyone has a previous one, 12 chapters have been removed from the previous and 7 new chapters or sections have been put in.
Cool. Thanks for
You have
sharing that.
another question?
Yeah, there are a few in the chat. I'll start with a comment from Martha. And I agree with this one. It's great to have knowledgeable professionals on your community team. Martha, they had an earth scientist and a lighting engineer in town to meet with park officials. It's important to offer concrete, specific solutions to businesses and organizations so they don't just dismiss dark sky compliance as too expensive.
Right.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Working with my local city recently, they wanted to consult really a consultant, a lighting consultant. And I said, what do you mean? I have it all like right here in front of you. Well, I don't carry the right letters after my name to get the right conversations to happen. There is another question here. I'll go with Todd, my neighbor here in Maple Grove. You mentioned email form letters have very little impact. What other forms of communication might have more impact other than face-to-face meetings?
Okay, well, let's not say other than, along with.
In addition to, there you go.
I mean, let's not be shy about it. I mean, of course, what did Maxine say? I was scared, worried that I wouldn't know what I'm talking about. Yeah, I'm going to say another thing in a moment, but again, it's communication. It's kind of, that there's a relationship. and if I'm thinking Congress, that one on your team has an ongoing relationship with the issues staffer in DC, for example, or if it's more local, same thing, that you want these relationships to happen. Uh, there was something brilliant I was going to say that was related to um, it'll come back, but this is it. This is it. So wait a minute. If 79% say they do email form letters, but only of professionals, but only 3% of congressional staff say it makes a big difference, why don't more organizations do transformational advocacy and not just well, my answer is the fear of making big asks of volunteers. In other words, if we're 26 people, if we're on this call and I'm going to start a DarkSky chapter, and I tell you that we're going to start with a 4-part new group training, 90 minutes every week for 4 weeks to get this DarkSky chapter, I may think, nobody's going to agree to a 4-part new group training. That's a big ask to make. I'm going to like water it down to a little tiny thing. And then I'm going to ask you to do a very tiny thing. And then you'll do a tiny thing and it won't make much difference in your world. And I was in the book, there's this story. I'm talking to this guy from a group whose focus is carbon removal, not just putting less carbon in the atmosphere, but removing carbon that's already in the atmosphere. He was going to speak on their first ever conference call about 2.5 years ago to all the chapters, and they were new. And he said, our chapter is 2 or 3 months old, and we've already met with 4 state officials, meaning 2 state reps and 2 state senators. And one of the state senate reps is chair of the committee on environment and energy, and he knew everything about climate change, but he'd barely heard of carbon removal. And he asked us to do a briefing for him and his staff. And I said, wow, you guys are 2 or 3 months old. You've already had met with 4 different state reps and senators. Have you done this before? Have you met with? No. These were my first meeting. I said, well, had you ever written elected officials? No. I'd never written, I'd never called, I'd never met before these 4 with elected officials. I said, put that in your talk. If you don't let people know, they're going to think, oh, he's an expert. I'm not an expert. He could do it. I couldn't. No, let them know you're a beginner too. This is a new organization, that you're a beginner too. So they won't write it off as he's an expert and I'm not. And that's all related to the fear of making big asks of volunteers. So they weren't afraid to say, we're going to start with a 4-part new group training. The question I heard was, what can we do? I think it was instead of in-person face-to-face meetings. No, I don't know if there's a little normal human fear of what are they going to say? Am I going to get a cease and desist letter? Or can I go for it? Kind of thing, and get over, it's the comfort zone and where the magic happens. Getting out of the comfort zone is getting over the fear.
Right. The basis of the question was just exactly that. We can make that big ask, and you're going to get a subset of people that you are going to be able to move to where the magic happens, but you're also going to have those people that are going to maybe move towards that magic, but not all the way. Yep. And so how do we get the most bang for the buck, if you will, out of those people? What are the ways that are going to be something they're still comfortable with, but are going to be more effective than that darn form letter?
Yeah, let me tell a little story. I was coaching a group, and their focus was money out of politics, a constitutional amendment to get money out of politics. And they met with the deputy chief of staff for a congressman. He's now running for Senate in my state, New Jersey. And and they knew that he was already co-sponsor of the bill, and they asked the deputy chief of staff, well, they thanked him and all that stuff, and asked if he would do a town hall meeting. It was during COVID. And a week later, the chief of staff deputy called back and said he'll do the town hall meeting on Zoom, and he'll give you guys a 15-minute meeting privately beforehand. And so they get to the meeting, the 15-minute meeting, they thank him for doing the town hall that's about to start. And they asked him if he would sign an op-ed in one of the largest papers in the state on Constitution Day. They kept asking him to do they kept asking them, you're a supporter, would you be an advocate? Do the town hall meeting. You're a supporter, would you sign this op-ed? Be an advocate, kind of thing. Of course, then he slips back to supporter. So my answer to you is there a way that you could, I don't know if you're thinking city council, county council, mayor, state legislator, I don't know what, to get them to such a state of support that they would speak at a town hall meeting or some kind of gathering, and that these folks who are not quite up to being in a small group meeting with an elected official or whatever would come to this event and see that they're human and hear some questions and maybe ask one of their own. Does that make sense? That kind of find some safer in-person activities. Organize a letter to the editor party where there's a little bit of training, and then everyone, and you can walk around and help with their letter, but they're not doing it on their own. They're coming with 5 others or 10 others or whatever, and participating with others in some, I'll call it more depthful action.
I like that. Thanks, Sam.
Great.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Maintaining those relationships are very important. Very cool. Well, folks, I think that we'll start to wrap up our time with Sam today. We'll post your website link here in the chat once more if you did want to check out Sam's website or look at his book. Did see someone already ordered it on Audible, so that's great to see. And yeah, Sam, any last closing thoughts or message you want to give to our dark sky advocates as they go back into their backyards? Yeah,
mostly thank you. Thank you for your work with the Dark Sky. Thank you for being in this call. Thank you for playing the long game rather than the short game. And thank you for your commitment to making a difference. And do what you can to talk with others, to enlarge the community of supporters where you live, and make that kind of difference. And, you know, if you're with any kind of group that would like to do a Zoom book talk like this, I'd prefer 15 or more folks kind of thing. Yeah, please let me know, Sam at civiccourage.org. And tonight at 8 o'clock in the Eastern United States, we're doing one more for folks in perhaps other time zones. And you might let folks know about tonight's call, and they might participate.
absolutely. Great. Well, thanks again, Sam. This was wonderful. And folks, thanks for joining today. If you do want, catch us at, like Sam said, 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific. Links, we can share that out once more. And thanks again for all your work and supporting Dark Skies. Be well.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks, everyone.